Star Citizen has a new official minimum spec CPU, but can it actually run the game? If you've got an older system, this video is definitely for you, and if you ever recommend Star Citizen to friends, this should also be very useful. So, CIG has recently updated the minimum spec page on the website. They've updated the GPU recommendations, and I'll definitely be picking up these cards to do a test soon. But the most interesting and most confusing part is the CPU changes. CIG used to recommend a quad-core Sandy Bridge CPU as the minimum on the Intel side. I tested this in the past, and it was unusable, completely unplayable in the cities especially. AMD Bulldozer performs even worse, so it's not even worth considering. But CIG are now stating that an i7 Sandy Bridge or newer is the minimum. So instead of just a quad core, we're now looking at a quad core with hyper-threading, 4 cores, 8 threads. So I picked up an i7 2600 for £20 on eBay. Let's see if CIG are finally recommending a decent CPU. Spoiler, they are not, but I will actually tell you what you really need at the end. Let's start with the good news, because it's not all completely unplayable. In quantum travel, you'll see here that the i7 2600 is actually doing pretty well. All the testing is done on DX11 with my standard settings, clouds on medium, all that sort of stuff. Look in the description for the full settings. But you can see compared to the 2400S, it's a decent bump in performance. And actually, we are actually GPU bound for the 1660 here. 42 is the same as the 10400 above it, both GPU bound. But that is a good result. And in space, very playable, lovely, 55 FPS. For this test, I wanted to actually get in game and show you some footage, so I've plugged the Sandy Bridge system into a capture card, and that does explain my terrible aiming here. I'm normally not this bad, don't worry. But you'll see here, when we're doing a bounty hunting mission, it is not completely unplayable. We are dipping under 30 FPS, but this is fairly playable. I would say anything around the 25 FPS mark in general, you can kind of get away with. So this isn't too bad. And when I went down to a bunker, you'll see getting down to the bunker itself is not ideal because as you go to the planet, we're dropping under 20 FPS. But once we actually get into the bunker, we're doing really well. I guess the game has streamed the planet out. We're just literally focusing on the bunker. Yeah, this is fine. You can get around, do these bunker missions at this sort of frame rate. It's not completely terrible. And just trying to land at this station, you see that it's kind of okay. I mean, there are obviously stutters and there are bigger kind of frame drops than you'd expect, but as long as you don't kind of mistime one of those stutters and slam into a wall, you can get around when you're not in the city. And let's now look at the cities. Let's start off in Area 18. I've got some, again, in-game footage. It's not ideal. We are definitely sub 15 FPS for most of this. And you can just see the general jitteriness and stutteriness. It's not ideal in any way. The problem with this is that it's your first impression of the game. So say you've recommended Star Citizen to somebody, you spawn in a city, and say you've got the minimum spec that CIG are recommending, it is a pretty unplayable experience. Now, I know this kind of performance was kind of standard for a while before we got object container streaming, and as long as the project has been running, this sort of performance was kind of standard. It's only really over the last few years as hardware has got better and there's been some optimization from CIG that the game has really been able to be played consistently above 30 FPS. But for somebody now trying the game in 2024, I don't think that is what you're hoping for from a modern game experience. And the other thing to factor in is that we're testing here on DX11, and when you load a game with DX11 for the first time, you're compiling the shaders for a good while, and especially on these older CPUs, that takes even longer. So performance actually is even worse than this when you first open up the game. And so there's a good case of Vulkan and pre-compiling all the shaders. That will help, definitely. But I'm not sure that anybody trying this on a system like this is going to find this acceptable. Up on the Horizon roof, well, it's kind of the same sort of picture. Although this isn't as heavy as the city is when you're down below in Horizon, we're still not getting great performance, and I don't think, again, this is really acceptable. And even worse in Lorville, the heaviest place, really. 12 FPS as an average is unusable, and this is really tricky to actually just get around, to move around at sub 10 FPS, because obviously that's an average. Certain parts are lower, certain parts are higher. It is not good in any way. So no, the i7 2600 can't really run the game. I've not even mentioned the number of times the system just completely crashed. So crashes the desktop, crashes the whole system's just shut down. Combined with the low performance, I cannot recommend the CPU. Why are CIG doing this? And my guess is it's probably related to Squadron 42. They obviously want as many people as possible to buy that game, and the lower the minimum specs are, that's obviously a good thing. And a single player game should be much less demanding and a more controlled environment. So maybe CIG has a Sandy Bridge system set up in a basement somewhere and it actually plays Squadron fine, but for Star Citizen, no. And what does this new page and these new specs even mean? It's very confusing. It sort of suggests that you have to have an i7, but this game will run fine on a 12th Gen i3. This whole page is a bit of a mess, and it does seem like CIG have just thrown these new recommendations up. I don't know whether they've tested them. I don't really understand what they're doing, but this is not the minimum spec CPU. Fortunately for you, if you're coming here thinking, can my PC play the game? I do know what the minimum spec CPUs really are. So I've done lots of testing on this in the past, and my current recommendations are, on the Intel side, the Intel i5-10400 or the i7-8700. They're pretty much the same chip, 6 cores, 12 threads. They are about as low on the Intel side that I'd want to go. They will not necessarily hit 30 FPS everywhere in the cities, especially. They'll dip below that, but in general, they are playable. And on the Ryzen side, the 3600, I think, from the Ryzen series is the lowest that you'd want to go. The more cores don't really help in Star Citizen, at least at this stage. Maybe as we get multi-threaded rendering for Vulkan, that will help. But at the moment, 6 cores, 12 threads is plenty on these kind of older CPUs. There will be people out there who are happily chugging along on an older i7, which has got 4 cores and 8 threads like this Sandy Bridge one, but maybe they've overclocked it a bit. Different people's expectations when they play a game will factor into this, but for me, I think you're hoping for around the 30 FPS mark as a minimum, and with dips below is acceptable. So they're the CPUs I recommend. I've got a full video you can check out if you want to look at what I'm recommending for a whole minimum spec system at this stage. But CIG, I don't know what you're doing. Why do you make these updates to this page? It was exciting. We're like, oh, maybe they've really got something there. They've done some testing, and this now is a real page that we can send people to and say, oh yes, look at the minimum specs, they'll actually help. But they do not. This CPU recommendation is not very good, and the GPU ones are even wilder. They're all over the place. So I've been buying a few bits off eBay, and we'll get that testing done and put out a video about that soon. So subscribe if you like this sort of stuff. Like this video. If you like it, you can become a member if you'd like to. Support the channel, and also the Discord is very helpful if you need help with Star Citizen PC needs.